Hello everyone and welcome to the first video in a while. I do apologize for that. Don't know if I was using the right button. As you are probably well aware, Dark Souls 2 came out last week and it kind of got me obsessed, and couple that with the fact that I can't play it in any time that I can't record, it kind of cut down on my recording by a lot. So we're going to be back to normal now that I have beaten the game, and I will be recording daily again, which should get us back on pace for having videos up, and no longer being in the being in this large lull that we've been in. I figured that I would take today as kind of a getting back in the shape of recording day by doing some Spelunky daily challenge right now. And I will probably be talking about some of my impressions of Dark Souls, some of the mechanics that I like and dislike, oh, excuse me, and just overall trying to give my opinions on the game without spoiling any of the story or anything, or any of the areas, but just kind of talking about some of the mechanics. So if you don't want even mechanical spoilers, you may not want to watch much farther into this video, but other than that, if you don't care about that so much, that's about what we'll be talking about throughout this video. First and foremost on that front, I would like to say that Dark Souls 2, if you haven't played it yet, whether you're waiting for the PC release or just haven't been able to play the console version yet, if you enjoyed Dark Souls 1, Demon Souls, you're gonna enjoy Dark Souls 2 most likely. It's the same thing in terms of it's very difficult, it is very fun, it's got a lot of very complex mechanics, the story ties in quite nicely when you start looking into it, which is of course one of the kind of caveats with any Souls game, is that if you want the story to tie into things, you're going to have to look into it quite a bunch. I have actually spent some time in the Reddit thread on lore to see how it all ties together, and kind of piece together what I put together from my play with what others have. And yeah, it certainly is actually very good at tying in with the first game. In terms of which is better, which I know is a question that a lot of people ask who haven't had the chance to play it, I don't think that's a question that has an actual answer. The reason for that is I think that it is a very good game, and it is to the point where trying to pick out which is better of Dark Souls versus Dark Souls 2 is way too close to call. I think we'll get a better idea of that as time goes on, but at the moment it is so on par with the original that there isn't really a way to definitively say which is better and which is worse. Let's see, what was one of them? Oh yes. One of the mechanics, if you are unaware, that has been added is kind of an anti-farming measure, is the fact that once you kill an enemy 15 times, I believe it is, they no longer spawn on the map. So let's say that you are having a lot of trouble with a boss, instead of having to fight your way through that area over and over endlessly, eventually at a certain point, all those enemies are going to disappear, and you're going to, oh my god, I need to get up there. That is a really annoying place for the chest. So essentially, I forgot I had sticky bombs, that's not so bad after all. What was I getting at here? Oh yeah, essentially if you are, having trouble with the boss, eventually the area on the way to the boss is going to clear itself out, and that is going to allow you to, get to the boss without having to go through the tedium of fighting a bunch of enemies on the way. But kind of the side note to that is that because there are no enemies there, you are pretty much just walking through the area doing nothing on your way back to the start. I'm back to the boss, and there's really nothing to be gained from it. There's not, souls to be gained, there's not drops to be gotten. Eventually you're just literally walking through an empty space to try and Thank you for the Kabbalah hired help. You're just walking through an empty space and trying to survive the boss itself. Now, this does make things... excuse me, I'm not sure why my voice is acting up right now. This does make things a little bit easier in some respects. It certainly means that you aren't going to run into situations where... like you would occasionally in the first game where, you know, you're making a mistake on the route to a boss that you've fought a bunch of times, and so you don't have full Estus by the time you get there. That kind of thing doesn't happen as much because usually if you fought a boss enough where you've got the area down, usually most of the enemies have despawned. It also kind of lends itself to making it, what am I looking for here? To making it where you don't necessarily memorize the areas quite as well as you would in Dark Souls 1. There are a couple of bosses that gave me enough trouble where this happened. And as a whole, it kind of... I did not think I was going to bounce that eye. Oh my god, are you kidding me? That just happened. Dear lord. Oh... But yeah, you know, there are a couple areas where I don't feel like I know how to get through them fully without having enemies despawn, which is not necessarily a good thing. There's one area in particular that was probably the worst design in the game for melee characters. As a whole, I feel like melee is kind of a bit more discouraged in this game than it has been in the past. If you don't have some type of faith or intelligence, melee is certainly in some areas quite more difficult. Of course, you can always go with a bow, which is how I got through some of the areas where melee seemed kind of outside the realm of possibility. But as a whole, it, how to put it best, without spoiling any areas or anything. Okay, I'll actually talk about something similar. What I do want to say on that is I kind of worried that the fact they knew enemies would despawn after a while made them less worried about making the areas balanced for any type of playstyle to get through. I think that would be a negative if that's the case. There's, you know, one area in particular that was horribly designed for melee characters, that I had to resort to a bow to get through, or else I was just going to be dying over and over again. I don't particularly like the fact that that is the case, and I hope that's not the reason why. I hope it was just a misguided level design, and not just, well, eventually the enemies are going to go away anyway, so might as well just make it ridiculous. That was bad. But another example of, and a more direct example of why I feel like melee or straight melee is kind of discouraged is the fact that when you imbue a weapon with an element, so fire, magic, enchanted, dark, or lightning, those all scale with your spell stats. It's no longer like it was in Dark Souls 1 where when you imbue a weapon, it no longer scales. It now, sorry, just had to take care of that. It now drops down some of your base damage on that weapon. It drops your scaling down a level, and then it gives you the elemental damage, which seems all well and good, except for the fact that if you don't have intelligence or faith, which all of the elemental damage scales on one or the other at least, if not both, then you end up in a position where by imbuing your weapon, sure, you've got more, you can get through physical resist better, which, you know, when it comes to most of the shields in the game, for PvP especially, obviously getting through resist is helpful, but it also means that you are a little bit handcuffed in terms of doing damage because your scaling has gone down, so you won't be doing as much as you had been before, and and since you aren't getting any bonuses from the intelligence or faith scaling if you have, you know, 5 of each doing a pure melee build, then you are in a position where you're just not going to be making a whole lot of damage out of the elemental, and it doesn't end up coming back to make up for the amount of damage that you lost. And that's kind of scary in terms of trying to get through the game well. And it's kind of a weird decision, I think. You know, I understand they wanted them to scale, and it makes sense to have them scale with the spell stats, but essentially you hamper any class that's not using intelligence or faith in their build from being able to use the weapon imbuements. Now they do have poison and bleed imbuements as well, which, you know, can stack up pretty well, especially with poison being a bit closer to toxic from Dark Souls 1 than poison in terms of how fast it drains your health. But those also lower your base damage quite significantly. Those scale a bit with dex, but not enough, I feel, to make it really worth... Really? Really? Not enough to really make it worth using, at least in PvE. You know, when you're doing PvP, it's a little bit different, because you kind of want to stack that damage and get in their head a little bit. And you know, when you're poisoned and you're taking a lot of health loss per second, yeah, you're kind of not going to play as well. So it doesn't work poorly for PvP as much, I don't think. Although I could see it coming to a point where people decide to just not use imbuements all that often in PvP. Outside of when their opponent has a resist to physical that's high enough. But at the same time, it kind of feels like if you're not playing with... I mean, even if you're playing a dex character, I think mine was... What do I have on there now? Because I respec after the end boss, I started using a dex-based weapon. So I respec to about 30 dex and 25 strength or so. That let me use the katana I was using and gave me a little bit of scaling for the armor I'm using, which is very good armor, mind you. But what am I getting at here? You know, by not having any... But even with the scaling that is endemic to the poison and bleed stones, I don't really feel like it did enough to make up for the sheer amount of damage that I lost by way of imbuing the weapon on its own. So I feel like I ended up going back to regular. Granted, I haven't been doing PvP, I've been doing just regular play so far. I still kind of feel like it was in a position where if I didn't go back, I wasn't going to be able to do anything in the game that I hadn't done yet successfully, especially not New Game Plus and beyond, where enemies are very significantly more difficult. So I just kind of feel like that pure melee build that used to be perfectly viable has kind of gone down a little bit. I don't think that it's as possible to do anymore, and that kind of makes me sad, because that is how I have tended to play the Souls games. Crap, I'm gonna have to use another rope to get out of here. But, all things considered, you know, I still beat the game. I used magic, I used, bows occasionally, not very often. There were only a couple areas in the game where I really felt that I needed to use a bow, and that is the only places where I did use one. But it's also, you know, there were points where I felt like it would have been easier if I could have had scaling on my stats. for a long time I was using a sword you can get relatively early that has a lightning imbuement naturally. And it was working pretty well. But eventually the fact that the scaling was down because of the fact that it had lightning, it left me in a point where late game it was doing very little damage because it wasn't scaling with my stats well enough. And so I ended up replacing it. That's when I went to that Uchigatana. And, you know, it's not necessarily the best thing for that to be the case. For it to feel like I kind of had to switch weapons there, not because of actual... not because the weapon itself wasn't good, but because it was a melee weapon that was lightning, and that meant that if I didn't have faith, it wasn't going to scale well for me. So that's really kind of my only complaint about Dark Souls 2, is the fact that it does feel like they kind of handcuffed melee-only characters. Other than that, I think that it is very well put together. You know, obviously I was a bit obsessed with it for a while there, that's why there were no videos. But at the same time, you know, I do see myself going back and playing more. They have added a lot of value to the New Game Plus modes. Not only can you activate New Game Plus areas before actually going to New Game Plus by way of a new item that you can burn at the bonfire, which is actually a really cool change. The fact that if you want to jump ahead and get something from a higher New Game Plus mode without putting yourself in that area, you can. That is really, really nice to be able to do so. What am I getting at here? Yeah, the item, how I was mentioning how enemies despawn at 15 kills. They do, but you can also respawn them by making the area the equivalent of New Game Plus, which not only brings all the enemies back, but it also, from my experience with Bonfire, Skedix, the items that you use, it also gives you a bit of a bigger challenge by way of including new enemies like Red Phantoms in the area that kind of tunes up the difficulty a little bit more. Causes you, even if you know the areas, to have to kind of take your time and figure out what's new in them. And I think that's a very good change. That's one of the changes I enjoyed most, was the fact that New Game Plus has gotten more directly beneficial. Similarly, they have it where, if you didn't know, there's a thing called soul memory in Dark Souls 2. And this is essentially the grand total of souls you've collected, whether you lost them, whether you spent them, whether you leveled up or used them on consumables. This is the grand total of all the souls that you have collected over your playthrough. In New Game Mode, the original playthrough, this is used to help determine who you can invade, who you can co-op with. All that kind of stuff takes soul memory into account. Now, from what I understand, once you get to New Game Plus, this isn't the case anymore. And part of their plan for it was to kind of make sure that people who were just getting into the game weren't being tossed against people who had played a bunch of it, who knew all the tricks, who had, you know, a level 1 build that had spent so many souls on leveling up their Pyromancer's glove and everything that it wasn't anything remotely close to a level 1. That's the kind of thing that I think they were trying to fix with the soul memory change. And they've also, in effect, they've kind of made PvP a little bit less common on your first playthrough. I did not get invaded very often throughout it. I did get invaded a decent amount, like a few times, but which isn't bad considering that Xbox Live was down for a good segment of my gameplay. But as a whole, it is not as much, I would say, as your first playthrough of Dark Souls you would run into when the game first came out, if you were playing through as human. But attached to that, you know, there is no way to avoid invasions now and still play online. If you want to use co-op, you're going to be at risk for invasions. But even if you don't, even if you're playing like I was, where you're just playing straightforward solo, which I did all the way until the last boss, which I summoned on because it was about 5:30 in the morning, and I did not particularly want to stay up much later. Come on, kill yourself on the TD trap. But it certainly puts you in a position where you're probably going to be getting invaded less your first playthrough. And once you get to New Game Plus, it kind of opens up. The soul memory, from what I understand, doesn't matter at that point, because a New Game Plus, one person can connect with a New Game Plus, 8 or 9 person, and so it accounts for that. Which I think is going to make it where kind of the meta, so to speak, is to be on New Game Plus to do PvP events. Not only does that give you full time to get yourself leveled up and everything, to get access to all the stuff that is that is New Game Plus only, but it also opens up the ability for you to fight anyone regardless of how many battles they've had and everything. So I think that in general you're going to see the meta be to move on to New Game Plus and then PvP from there. I don't know why I'm not taking the torch with me. This is silly. Which isn't a bad thing. I think that there is certainly enough benefit to going to New Game Plus in this game where encouraging people to go there is good. Of course, it does kind of take away from how simple it was in Dark Souls 1. One of the predominant invasion areas was the kiln of the first flame. That endgame area, right when you are able to reach it, you can just start PvPing there, and then you just don't beat the game, and you use that to... Black market has been found. You use that to PvP in. In this game, there are certainly situations where things are a little bit more... where you're beating the game through before you start PvP is certainly sensical. I don't know how easily you can get back to those late game areas, or if it's going to turn out where the predominant PvP areas are early game areas on New Game Plus. I haven't actually jumped into New Game Plus myself yet. I have like 2 more optional bosses. Oh my god, are you kidding me? I have like 2 more optional bosses to fight. Actually 3, but one of them I probably won't be fighting. And then I will be moving on and I'll have a little bit better idea how that works. I do know that you get some additional nice little benefits that not only help tie the lore together, but also put you in a position where you are very much capable of getting some extra items for being on New Game Plus. And beyond, there are actually, for example, there's one armor set that from what I've read gets only sold on a certain level of New Game Plus and beyond. And not even the first one, but a few in. I'm not sure the exact number or anything, but it's certainly a situation where New Game Plus has been pushed this time through. Instead of just being the enemies are harder, now go have fun. There's certainly reasons to go to New Game Plus for actual practical reasons, which is a big plus. I should also add that the area design in Dark Souls 2 is really, really good. There were a lot of really nice looking areas. There was one area that was horrifying. You'll probably hear it referred to as the Blight Town of Dark Souls 2 because of how horrible it is. But as a whole, it's not such a bad thing. And the level design throughout the whole game is quite nice, actually. So I would highly recommend the game, is pretty much what I'm getting at here. There's pretty much no reason I can see if you like Dark Souls 1 to not pick up 2. It is more of the same with some nice changes. Like I said, whether it's better or worse, it's hard to tell. But they're certainly both top-tier games that well deserve to be played. And 2 has not lost anything in the transition. Except for maybe, it can be a little bit easier with enemies despawning. But as a whole, it is certainly as good of a game. It is still very difficult. I died, I believe it was 474 times on my first run. That was really stupid. I don't know why I tried that. But yeah, so I mean, I died a lot. Granted, I was, not using summons. I was playing through on a build that I feel it doesn't have quite as much advantage as others. But as a whole, it went decently well for me. I never really ran into a wall where I thought that I couldn't beat a boss with melee. There was only one area that I thought that was going to be really tough, if not impossible, to beat with melee. Everything else was just a matter of learning the areas, learning the patterns, and moving through them. And it worked really well. I very much enjoyed what Dark Souls 2 had to offer. I will be playing not only more so on the save that I already have going, but I'll probably be making a couple other characters to experiment with more faith or intelligence-based builds, more magic-based builds is what I'm going for, magic or miracles. Pyromancy, I should also add real quick, also now somewhat scales with stats. It is based on your flame bonus, which is gained from a combination of intelligence and faith, I believe. And so if you don't level those up, you're not going to have quite as overpowered pyromancy as you would have in the first one by just leveling up the glove to 10, but it's still going to be more than workable with just a level 10 pyro glove. I didn't actually have an attunement slot, which is the only reason I didn't use any pyromancy myself, but it's certainly still very much reasonable to use it even if you don't level those stats. So it is still kind of the go-to for, if you're doing a low-level build, that'll probably be your go-to for how to survive in the late game. But you also can start as a pyromancer, and you don't get a pyromancy glove until a decent bit into the game. Not an insurmountable amount, but a decent ways. So doing that soul level 1 run is going to be more difficult. Further than that, it takes even longer than that to actually be able to upgrade your pyro glove. You actually need to have beaten one of a couple of the kind of end of path bosses. God damn it, bats. You do need to do that to be able to upgrade your pyro glove. So you're going to have to make it through a good deal of the game on the merits of your ability instead of just, relying on the early pyromancy to get you through and then making things happen from then on. So it's certainly something that is going to be a little bit changed. I am very interested to see what happens with those soul level 1 runs. How viable they still are at this point, because I feel like there is a lot more benefit to leveling now. I should also add the adaptability stat that increases the invincibility frames of your roll and makes you roll further, and various other things. I believe even so much as making you drink your Estus flask quicker. Those kind of things are going to come into question of how valuable they are compared to a soul level 1 run. It's going to be very interesting to see what people can do. It's by no means something that I'm ready to do yet. Oh yes, that's also the other thing that's going to make it a little bit harder for soul level 1 runs, is that, with humanity not being a thing anymore, you can still go human, but it's not a counter that stacks up. It's not something that, you have to be at a bonfire for, and then you pop an item, and then you have to use what you get from that item for it. It's just something that you pop the item and you're human. But this also means that there is no more chaos weaponry that is stacked by way of how much humanity you have in your counter currently. So you know, that was kind of the go-to scaling thing for soul level 1 builds, especially PvP soul level 1 builds, was to use a chaos weapon and then just stack humanity to make it scale up as if you had higher stats. That's not doable anymore. There isn't really a way to stack that scaling like there was in Dark Souls 1, which is going to be, again, interesting to see what people do to get around it. There is kind of one thing that I think is going to be the go-to, so to speak, of soul level 1 builds in terms of weapon imbuements. It is kind of an odd one that you can't really see any benefit to, just with looking at it on its most basic front. But you can certainly see the benefit if you do the math which someone has, and figure out how exactly it works. I'm not going to go into what exactly it is, but for builds that are reliant on scaling, not so useful. For soul level 1 builds, I think it'll be a hugely beneficial thing to do with certain items, which we'll have to see what happens with that. If I'm right that it's going to become kind of part of the soul level 1 meta or not. But I think that it will. I think that it is more than reasonable for it to. And we are going to do one more teleport run and then cut off. So overall opinions, Dark Souls 2 is one of the best games I have played in a long time. It is absolutely on par with the original Dark Souls. Oh, I want that. I didn't hit down. So I threw the bomb and bounced it instead of setting it down. Oops. But yeah, it is a phenomenal game that I think is going to have a great future in terms of PvP. What was the one thing I was going to say here? Oh yeah, the online is absolutely roaring on the console release at least. You know, invasions are a bit rare because of the soul memory and level matching in new game, in the original new game. But in New Game Plus, I understand that invasions are happening very rapidly. There are a couple of areas in the game that are kind of variations on the theme of the Forest Covenant from Dark Souls 1. In terms of, you know, you get a covenant that allows you to invade people in this area, and it makes you where you are, you know, automatically taking care of things. Those things, if you go into one of those areas, you're almost guaranteed to have something happen. You know, that's actually where I've actually gotten both of the 2 PvP wins that I've gotten, oddly enough, is from the one of the 2 covenants, which is based on, they're both based on optional areas, so if you don't want to deal with it, you don't have to. But I got a 2-on-1 invasion once in the one area, and managed to actually drag one of them away from the other, kill him, and then come back and kill the other. Most of the other PvP I've done, I've lost. I kind of expected as much because I don't have anything resembling an optimized build for my level. I think I ended the game at like level 132, and my build is not at all optimized, so there is certainly something to be said for I could be doing a lot better, and people probably are doing a lot better, and that's why I've had a lot of trouble. Not to mention the soul memory, for people who maybe are on their second character who had a better run of things on the first character, who got to spend more of their souls on different things that I didn't get access to. A lot of that stuff comes into play. But as a whole, PvP is jumping. Summoning, if you are looking to get someone to help you out on a boss. If you are human, there are almost always several summon signs laying around. I think as a whole, the game has gotten, at this early point in its life, it is still very much in the range of a hugely booming online community that I hope stays alive throughout its lifespan, better than, where Demon Souls and Dark Souls are at now. Dark Souls still has a pretty good community, but I think with Dark Souls 2 being out, once it hits on PC, you're pretty much not going to see very much activity on that one. Because I don't think there's much reason to stick with it over 2. So I think that you will see a big hit in terms of the activity of that community. And I hope that Dark Souls 2 stays, I guess I should say, as bustling as Dark Souls 1 did. Obviously the PC release coming out, I'm sure that the PC online is going to be just as active. Although, a lot of people would have considered buying it on PC who got it instead on the 360 or PS3 because it wasn't out on PC yet. I think that it's still going to be nice and booming when it comes out there. And it's fun. It's fun to be playing the game and know that at any given point you might wander into an area where you can get invaded or similar stuff like that. You can now get invaded when the boss of an area is already dead. So there is no more of that, trying to keep certain optional bosses alive so that you can PvP in their area and not have to worry about it. I think that this game has kind of given PvP a little bit more focus. It's just you have to get to New Game Plus to really experience what it's all about. Regardless, that's going to wrap it up for the Dark Souls 2 talk, and probably for this video because I am failing it up at some speedruns right now. And that death should do it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed my rambling about this game. Videos will be back to normal after today. I do apologize for the long absence, but again, I couldn't really play Dark Souls when I couldn't record, and I couldn't record when I couldn't play Dark Souls, and of the 2, Dark Souls won out pretty much every time. Not to mention the fact that I was kind of staying up a little bit late, and that led to certain things like accidentally oversleeping and then it being already, 4 o'clock when I woke up. Not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. But now that I'm kind of back to normal, now that the first playthrough obsession is done, we will be getting back to videos daily, and I will not be letting that happen again anytime soon. Thank you guys as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Take care, everyone, and have a good one. Later.